History will tell you that most of these men died of natural causes: fever, melancholy, a weak constitution. That is the sort of thing you write down when the alternative is describing what the room actually looked like. Every man on this list wore a crown, and every one of them died a prisoner, most of them inside a building they used to own. Some of them for years, one of them for his entire life. If you like history that the tourist plaques leave out, subscribing costs you nothing and keeps these coming. Number 1. Richard II of England, the king they had to put on public display before anyone would believe he was gone. It's the winter of 1400, and Richard II is in a room at Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. He was crowned at 10 years old. He ruled for 22 years. He is now 33, and the official paperwork concerning him refers to him as Richard of Bordeaux, which is a polite way of taking the crown out of the sentence. He is not being harmed. He is simply being kept, indefinitely, by a cousin who cannot afford to release him, and cannot afford to be seen ending him. Then his friends try to help. In January 1400, a group of his supporters launch what history calls the Epiphany Rising, an attempt to ambush the new king, Henry IV, at Windsor, and put Richard back on the throne. It collapses within days. The plotters are hunted down and executed, and the message that arrives at Pontefract is unmistakable, because a living Richard is a permanent invitation. By the middle of February, he is dead. The official cause is that he stopped eating. Chroniclers of the period disagree about whether that was his own decision or the arrangement of the men holding the keys, and at this distance it comes to roughly the same thing. Here's the part that tells you how nervous Henry was. The body is carried more than 150 miles south to London and put on public display for 2 days, sealed in lead with only the face left uncovered, so that thousands of Londoners can file past and confirm with their own eyes that the man is gone. It is the 15th century version of releasing the body camera footage. Then he is buried quietly at King's Langley, well away from the royal tombs at Westminster. 13 years later, Henry V digs him up and reburies him in Westminster Abbey with full honors, because Henry V wanted that particular ghost on his side before he sailed for France. And here's where it gets really interesting. The Westminster tomb had a small hole in the side of it, and for generations, visitors reached in. In 1776, a Westminster schoolboy named Herbert Taylor put his hand through that hole and walked out of the abbey with Richard II's jawbone in his pocket. It stayed in his family for 130 years. His descendants finally gave it back in 1906. So Richard II was deposed by his cousin, starved in a Yorkshire castle, exhibited to a crowd like evidence, buried in the wrong place, dug up, moved, and then partially stolen by a child. He is the only English king whose funeral took 500 years to finish. Which brings us to the Guangxu Emperor of China, number 2, and the one nobody warns you about. It's the summer of 1898 in Beijing, and a 27-year-old emperor is signing edicts faster than his own ministries can copy them. He is rebuilding the examination system, the army, the schools, the railways, the entire administrative spine of the Qing dynasty, all at once, because he has watched China lose a war to Japan and concluded that the alternative to reform is disappearance. For a few months, he is genuinely running the largest population on Earth. That lasts 103 days. On the 21st of September 1898, his aunt, the Empress Dowager Cixi, takes the government back in a palace coup. 6 of his reformers are executed. Guangxu is moved to Yingtai, the ocean terrace, a small pavilion on an island in a lake inside the palace complex, reachable by one causeway. He is not deposed. That is the detail that makes it strange. He remains, on paper, the Emperor of China for another 10 years. He is brought out for ceremonies, seated where an emperor sits, bowed to by men who know exactly what he is, and then taken back to the island. He dies on the 14th of November 1908, age 37. His aunt dies the following afternoon, less than 22 hours later. But it got weirder. In 2008, a full century after the fact, a joint team of Chinese forensic and historical institutes tested his hair, his bone fragments, and the clothing buried with him. They found arsenic. Not a trace, not the background level you would expect from period medicine, but concentrations in sections of his hair running more than 2,000 times higher than the control samples, with the heaviest readings on the parts of the fabric that had lain against his stomach. The conclusion, published openly, was blunt. The emperor was poisoned, in a single large dose, in the last days of his life. That is a cold case closed by a laboratory 100 years after every suspect, every witness, and every lawyer involved had turned to dust. Nobody has ever proved who gave the order. The timing is not what you would call subtle. His aunt was dying, she knew she was dying, and a reform-minded emperor who outlived her by even a week would have had a very long memory and a very free hand. Guangxu was emperor for 33 years and a prisoner for the last 10 of them, inside his own palace, about 400 yards from the throne. Number 3 is Bayezid I, and this one comes with an argument attached. It's the 28th of July, 1402, on the plain outside Ankara, and the Ottoman Sultan is losing a battle he expected to win before lunch. It is brutally hot, and the wells have been fouled. His Tatar cavalry have changed sides in the middle of the field. His Serbian allies fight to the last man while his own vassal troops walk across to the enemy in whole units. By nightfall, Bayezid, the man they called the Thunderbolt, the man who had destroyed a European crusade at Nicopolis 6 years earlier and was at that moment strangling Constantinople, is riding for the hills with a handful of men. His horse goes down. He never sees his capital again. The man who takes him is Timur, and Timur does not really do dungeons. He does not need one. Bayezid becomes luggage. He is carried along with the army as it moves through Anatolia for the next 8 months, a captive sultan hauled from camp to camp as a walking demonstration of what happens. He dies on the 8th of March 1403 at Akshehir, aged around 53. Some sources say illness. Some say he took his own life. The famous version, the one in every painting, is that Timur kept him in an iron cage, and that account comes from later writers working from hostile or second-hand material, with historians arguing for 2 centuries about whether the cage was a cage or a barred traveling litter. Take it as you like. And here's the thing. The empire very nearly ended right there. Bayezid's surviving sons spent the next 11 years fighting each other over what was left, a period the Ottomans themselves call the interregnum, and for over a decade there was effectively no sultan at all. The state that would take Constantinople in 1453 came within one family argument of not existing in 1403. It is the corporate equivalent of the founder dying in custody and the company surviving purely because the heirs were too evenly matched to finish each other off. Timur, for his part, had no interest in occupying Anatolia. He had made his point and taken his prisoner, and he went home. He sent Bayezid's body back to Bursa for burial with full honors, which was, by the standards of everybody else in this story, extremely courteous. Louis XVII of France. Number 4. The king that more than 100 grown men would later claim to be. It's 1794, and there is a boy in a tower room in the Temple prison in Paris. He is 9 years old. The door has been sealed and a hatch cut into it, and food is passed through the hatch without a word, because the men guarding him have been instructed not to speak to him, and he has been given no reason to speak to them. He has not seen his mother since July of the previous year. He does not know that she is dead. Nobody says his name. His father, Louis XVI, was executed in January 1793, and from that moment every royalist in Europe considered this child the King of France. That is the entire reason for the room. He was taken from his family, handed over to a cobbler named Antoine Simon, and after Simon left in January 1794, he was kept in near total isolation for roughly 6 months. He died on the 8th of June 1795, aged 10. The cause was tuberculosis, helped along by exactly the conditions you would expect. He was buried in a mass grave, and because of that, half of Europe spent the next 100 years refusing to believe he had died at all. Now here's what nobody tells you. The doctor who performed the autopsy, Philippe Jean Pelletan, removed the boy's heart, wrapped it in a handkerchief, and walked out of the prison with it in his pocket. He preserved it in alcohol in a crystal urn. It was then stolen by one of his own students, returned years later by that student's widow, hidden during the sacking of the Archbishop's palace in 1830, passed quietly between royalist families for over a century, and eventually placed in the royal crypt at Saint-Denis. A chain of custody like that would be laughed out of any courtroom on earth, which is exactly why in 2000 they tested it. Genetic material from the heart was compared against hair taken from Marie Antoinette as a child and against living maternal relatives of the Habsburg line. It matched. The boy who died in that tower was Louis Charles, precisely as the record had always said. In June 2004, the heart was formally interred at Saint-Denis, beside his parents. It took 209 years to bury a 10-year-old with his family. All the men who spent their lives insisting they were him were, by then, comfortably dead. Number 5. Ivan VI of Russia, the prisoner his own guards were forbidden to name. It's 1759, and there is a young man of 19 in a cell in the Schlüsselburg fortress, on an island where the Neva leaves Lake Ladoga. He has no visitors. He has never had a visitor. The 2 officers assigned to him have been ordered to address him as Grigory, and in the paperwork of the Russian state, he is listed as the nameless prisoner, number 1. He has been in custody since he was 15 months old, because before that, he was the emperor. Ivan was proclaimed Emperor of all the Russias in October 1740 at 2 months old. In December 1741, Elizabeth, daughter of Peter the Great, walked into the palace with a company of guards and took the throne in a single night, and the infant emperor and his family were quietly removed. They were held at Kolmogorov in the frozen north for years. At around 16, he was separated from his parents and his brothers and sisters and moved in secret to Schlüsselburg, and from that point he was kept alone. His existence was officially denied. Coins bearing his name were called in and melted down. Documents recording his reign were ordered destroyed. The really wild part is that none of it worked. Despite being raised in isolation by men forbidden to tell him anything at all, Ivan knew who he was. He told his jailers he was the emperor. Catherine the Great, who took the throne in 1762, went to look at him in person, in disguise, and reported afterwards that his speech was broken and his mind was unwell, which was probably true and was also extraordinarily convenient for her. She then signed the instruction that actually mattered. If anyone ever attempted to free him, his guards were to end him rather than let him be taken alive. On the 5th of July 1764, a lieutenant of the garrison named Vasily Mirovich decided to try. He rallied part of the guard, produced a manifesto, and moved on the cell. His 2 jailers, Vlasiev and Chekin, followed their standing order to the letter. Ivan was 23. He was buried the same night, in an unmarked spot inside the fortress walls. Mirovich was tried and beheaded, and the entire affair was closed inside 2 months. Imagine being deleted from a country's records while still alive inside one of its buildings. Ivan VI was emperor of the largest country on earth for 1 year and 1 month, and its prisoner for 22 years. He never saw a portrait of himself. Nobody alive today knows exactly where he is buried. So, there you have it. 5 crowned monarchs who died as prisoners, most of them behind walls they used to own. Richard II was displayed to a crowd for 2 days so nobody could pretend he was still out there. Gwangju ruled from an island in his own back garden for 10 years and carried enough arsenic to be detected a century later. Bayezid the Thunderbolt spent his last 8 months as a trophy in another man's baggage train. Louis XVII waited 209 years to be buried properly. And Ivan VI was Emperor of Russia for 13 months, and its prisoner for 22 years, and never once knew what his own face looked like. The strange part is that not one of them was locked up for anything he did. They were locked up for what they were, which is the only thing on the list that none of them chose, and the only thing none of them could resign from. One question before I go. Which of these 5 would you have taken if you had to pick a cell? Put it in the comments because I already know which one everybody picks and I want to see if I'm right.